afternoon, everyone. Happy to see you here. I'm Roger Remington, the Yale professor. I'd like to welcome you all to the continuing series of presentations we have sponsored by the Yale Center for Design Studies. We call it Design Conversations, and we're very happy to have you here for an exciting presentation. And I'm going to, at this point, toss the ball to my colleague, Josh Owen, who will introduce our guest speaker today.
Welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming. My name is Josh Owen. I'm the chair of the Industrial Design Program. We're absolutely delighted to have Gary Smith from Herman Miller with us today. He's an old friend at this point, and we're thrilled about that. Gary is the Vice President of Product Design and Exploration at Herman Miller Incorporated, a global leader in design furnishings for working, living, and healing environments. In over 2 decades with Miller, Gary has developed relationships with industrial design talent throughout the world and gently guides design activities within exploration and development to continue Herman Miller's widely recognized leadership in product design and innovation. Gary's work helps represent the historical importance of design to Herman Miller's brand and culture. Prior to Miller, Gary practiced industrial design as design director at Hasbro, a leading global manufacturer of toys. His work focused on products for infants and preschoolers, working with such product brands as Mr. Potato Head, My Little Pony, Weebles, and many other infant health and safety products under the Playskool baby brand, many of which you probably grew up with. Just a short word about that quiet role that design leader like Gary brings to design innovation. He works with amazingly talented designers around the world, and it's the careful cultivation of those relationships, as he likes to say, the tilling of the soil and the fertile ground for design, which is the vital work that he does. I'm privileged to have had the good fortune to work closely with Gary as part of the Meta project the year before this, and delighted to have him back with us at RIT. So thank you so much for coming here.
Thank you. I am decked out here.
Yes, you are, but turn it on.
It is on. Hopefully you can hear it. Well, thanks, Josh. I am like absolutely unaccustomed. I'm usually more intimate. I'm the type of guy I want to talk to you. I want to get in your eyes. And so, because I'm going to be uncharacteristically using a PowerPoint, what I'd really love is see you later on. There's pizza going on. I'd love to chat with you and maybe look at you eyeball to eyeball and have a more intimate conversation. So I welcome you guys to come wherever it is. Is that here?
In the ID area,
okay.
4th floor.
So thank you. I'll look forward to that. I'll agree, one of the reasons I'm standing here is because over a couple of years, I really come to respect Josh, know him as a friend, and I hope you guys are kind of self-aware of the kind of leadership he's bringing to your design education. It's quite remarkable, and it's great to see, so thank you, Josh. The second reason I'm here is because I was so inspired, and I always am when I see real energy, passion, and commitment. The Meta project, was that 4? Yeah, 4 was a real pleasure. And across the board, top to bottom, the way the students challenged me, it's kind of like, I think of it as like pouring fuel back in my tank. And you get into the daily stress of a multi-billion-dollar business, and you as students really serve me in a way that helps sustain a career over decades and puts that energy back in. So that's the other thing I'd like to say relative to thanks. And lastly, I'd like to thank a gentleman who's not here, my colleague at Herman Miller, former RIT graduate in design, Dan Rucker. Many of you may know him. He unfortunately fell ill and was unable to come, but poor Dan suffered through my vetting of thoughts and stories on your behalf. So if there's anything I say that makes no sense or whatever, let's all blame Dan, okay? Okay, so Josh mentioned Mr. Potato Head. You know, it occurred to me, hey, wait a minute. This audience is probably going to be about, you know, think about what you were doing in 1982 and 1983 and 4 when I was working on teams doing things like Mr. Potato Head. I was having incredible fun, and I will say that some people always ask me, like, must have been a pretty stark shift from the toy design to the furniture design. And it was in many ways, but actually what really is the continuity was the deep joy I had, the deep, abiding sense of serving those children and bringing joy to their lives or education to their lives. And that hasn't left me, remarkably, 25 years with Miller. So as guidance, just to start this thing, because I'm going to level set with a few examples of work from that toy period and from Herman Miller, is that you'll have that self-awareness of the role, the service role that design can provide to people you'll never know. I will say about Mr. Potato Head, this is a success story. Prior to this, he lost some weight, he quit smoking, he got married, he had some kids, so he really turned his life around from his couch potato existence. You caught that one? All right. Just to show you that I still got it, see, in the late 70s, you had to be an art major to be a designer because there were no technologies, there was no computers. So you had to learn to paint, you had to learn to sculpt. And so in those days, as a fine art major, you know, I sketched a lot of My Little Ponies. About a year ago, a friend said, "Is it true you actually designed My Little Ponies?" Like, there was a billion of them. You may or may not know that. But, so I said, yeah. And he says, "Could you sketch me a My Little Pony?" And so I sat at my kitchen table. This was the first shot. I just sketched this pony. And I'm like, darn, that's actually a pretty good pony for not having sketched one in maybe 25 years. So the time is given away. You notice every pony has a little adornment of their hind quarter, and this is a Christmas tree with snowflakes, and her name is Noelle. All right, isn't that adorable? Or the last one I'll just share with you is glowworm. Now, maybe if you don't know what glowworm is, it's this adorable little cherubic worm, and you can squeeze it, and its face lights up, you know, and so you can snuggle it if you're 4 years old, and you'd see this adorable little face smiling at you in that scary bedroom. And I'm actually going to tell you one more kind of infant design story, but I'm going to tell that a little bit later on. Although I want to digress for one moment and just from a full disclosure standpoint, these are not my inventions. And this is something you need to be prepared for in the working world, which is that most things, unless you're doing art, most things in design are teams of people, product teams and so forth. So it would be inaccurate to say, oh, I designed this or I designed Mr. Potato Head. It is accurate to say I was part of a preschool team which is addressing the Potato Head line and later Potato Head Kids and Glowworm and baby glowworms and things like that. That's the way that business worked. So I just want to be clear about that this isn't the portfolio shot. What was important for me, though, is I did realize, I kind of mentioned this, that I was learning a lot from these young children. I was learning how congruent their emotions were with their behaviors. And when you see a child and you realize how unfiltered that is, you get comes dawn on you after a while, maybe not fully at the time, but you realize the control you have, your ability to put joy into something. And I was always struck by that. As my career progressed, I keep thinking back to those children. I once watched a child have an absolute tantrum over some toy I designed at a Toys R Us. I was secretly gleeful, to be honest with you. It was like the child was having his tantrum, screaming at mom for this toy. I'm like, go, you know. But I thought that I would take this beginning and kind of weave in a whole lot of other actors into this story and hopefully reveal a little about the ethos of design at Herman Miller, and maybe you'll learn a little bit about myself as well. So a company will not be judged by its profits alone, but by its impact on humanity. This is a quote from D.J. Dupree, the founder of Herman Miller. And I can't think of a better way to start a conversation about Herman Miller than to quote DJ. Some of you may or may not know that Herman Miller is generally acknowledged as one of the kind of preeminent brands in American design. Most people know, and you'll see some images in a second, about the great mid-century work of the Eameses and Nelsons and so forth. But the story really started in 1930 when DJ hired Gilbert Rohde as a designer, and then over all the years since 1930, with the likes of George Nelson, Charles and Ray Eames, Bob Probst, Bill Stump, Aisha Bursell to the contemporary day, Yves Bahar, so forth. There's this been great and unbroken parade of folks just like yourself, really remarkable creative folks. I want to talk to you as peers in that conversation. I want you to place yourself there, not as this is something outside of yourself or outside of your possibility. It is. It's just us. We're designers talking to each other. So that's how I'd like you to be thinking about the way I'd like to share with you today. So I'm going to take you through a brief stroll through a little bit of Herman Miller history, and then I'll actually get to this level setting will help make the core of the presentation a little more logical, I hope. I think of this as like a design garden. So here's a Gilbert Rohde piece, designed in probably 1933 or 34. It's a residential dresser. What's important about this is at the time, Miller and many other companies would send people on boats to Europe, and they would sketch the fancy designs, come back, and then those would be replicated or copied. They were always, massively ornamental and complicated. Gilbert Rohde had a vision of modern furniture. He said, hey, in the 16th century, modern furniture was designed in the 16th century. Why are we replicating 18th century and 19th century designs here in the 20th century? Why don't we eschew ornamentation and decoration and address the honesty of operational process and materials and create beautiful, affordable, contemporary, modern furniture for the masses? And so that was what he was kind of philosophically doing here. Next example, these will be chronological. That was 1933 or 4. 1946, the Eames LCW, that stands for Lounge Chair Wood, voted by Time Magazine as the best design of the 20th century. I mean, that's just one mag's view, but I'll take it. Do you know what took second by any chance? Anybody know the story? The diesel locomotive. Get that. This beat out the diesel locomotive. I thought that was pretty good. What's amazing about this chair, if you've never sat in one, is it's rigid materials connected through kind of isolating elastomeric elements, i.e. rubber, soft interfaces, which provide this dynamic flex and this amazing comfort. It's remarkably comfortable for a unupholstered chair. This is Isamu Noguchi, designed in 1948. This simple symmetrical structure, counterposed by the asymmetry of the top. It's just an enduring beauty. This has been around for what, 70 years, and it's gorgeous. The Eames Lounge and Ottoman. When I showed the LCW a minute ago, the red chair, you have to also remember that this was occurring in the immediate context of World War II. There were massive material shortages, especially in steel that was going into ships and guns. And so there was innovation in materials at that time where nose cones of aircraft and pilot seats and leg splints for infantry were being developed out of plywood. In some ways, the LCW and the Eames 670 Lounge here were kind of more mature expressions of that technology, kind of extrapolated to a commercial context. So I often think about things, whether you study Buckminster Fuller or whether you study an Eames 670 Lounge, you can think about it in the context of what was capable, both operationally, material, and societally in that period. This was 1956. I had to show this. This was designed in 1988. This is where I work. Imagine the joy of walking into that building every day. And it's these unprecious materials. It's poured concrete floors and knotty pine and corrugated steel and galvanized metal. And it's very unpretentious, and it's a single, it's a one-story building, and it's quirky as all get out. But the quirkiness of the layout of the building results in all this serendipitous exchange. You have to traverse the corridors to get through the building. It's an amazing building, and I really enjoy working there. Many of you know this chair. It's the Aeron chair, designed by Don Chadwick and Bill Stump. This was 1994. This was never about mesh, by the way. For those of you who don't know the story, our research showed that one of the primary causes of discomfort in a chair actually didn't have anything to do with cushion or pressure on your ischial bones and derriere. It had to do with heat, so that people would get up out of their chair if they were hot. And so the point of mesh wasn't to create a new genre. The point of the mesh was to mitigate the heat. And so this is where, when we talk about human-centered problem solving, at the center, it gives more meaningfulness to the chair. I'll tell you what, good design and innovation is worth money. We're a public company, so you could look this up, but we do almost $250 million sales in this chair on an annual basis. We make one of these every 17 seconds and pretty much have been doing that since 1994. You can do that math. To someone who's already bought it. We don't put anything in inventory. This is a leaf light. I think I have just one more after this. This is designed by Yves Bahar. What was interesting about this was, at the time, LEDs lights were typically 2 or 3 LEDs with massive heat sink blocks and fans, and you'd have these big heads for the light with 2 or 3 little LEDs and minimal light output. And they couldn't use more LEDs because the heat buildup is what destroys an LED. And so you had this mass and this minimal output. It's really a negative equation. What we found out we were able to do was use the blade of the aluminum blade to actually dissipate the heat as a sink element, and then use a matrix of 20 LEDs. And then an unexpected thing happened. Because we had so many LEDs and we didn't require fans or material mass, we were able to use warm and cool LEDs to allow shifts in color temperature and shifts in intensity. That was pretty breakthrough back in 2007. And then the last one I'll just show you is the Setu chair. This is introduced in 2010, designed by Studio 7.5 in Berlin. The core premise of this chair, if I share with you, the Aeron chair was about thermal comfort. This was about instant comfort, so that you could have a world-class chair, even like an Aeron chair, but maladjusted, it can actually be uncomfortable. If you find an Aeron chair in a conference room, you're sitting there for half an hour, you're not likely to avail yourself of the 9 controls on that chair. The one control you'll probably use is the height adjustment. And so this chair only has that one adjustment, and it's designed with a very dynamic and highly engineered beam, so that it supports your body using the weight and mass of your thighs to create the countervailing loads for your upper body. And so it's self-leveling, if you will, or self-balancing. I have to share with you, the designers here did have a sentiment which showed their progression from 2001 when they did their first chair for us, the Mira chair, to this one in 2010, which was the sentiment, not a molecule more than necessary. So they looked at everything with such a level of scrutiny to remove every molecule that was unnecessary to the performance purpose of the chair. And it really, if you look historically at their work, it was really a major step for them. I've shown you all these things, both toy things and these things, because I often find myself wondering, all these years later, you think about how it is that inanimate things can be imbued with such a spirit, right? And it occurred to me, it's not actually that complicated. It's because you decided to put it there. That's all it is. It's that you decided to think about the human in an empathetic way and decide to put the spirit in, right? There are so many things in this world that we can take or leave, that we're benign to or agnostic to, like, yeah, so what? Right? It's hard to say that to the things I've shown you. especially if you experience them beyond just a visual image. So that's just something to think about. You want to design in a way that the person who experiences that which you've created knows that you cared. All right? So this is Aisha Bursell. Absolute delight. I was just with her a couple weeks ago. And I want to share a brief video with you from her. I was actually going to only show the first 20 seconds, so that's a clue. I really want you to pay attention to the first 20 seconds or so. I'm actually going to let it run for the full 3 minutes, because she says some things in the end about being in alignment with values that I think is worthwhile for the extra 2 minutes. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to run this video, and I'd like you to hear what she says in the beginning especially.
Designer of life. I used to be a designer of products, but I'm now a designer of life.
That's what I wanted you to hear, okay?
I'm Aisha Bursell, and we're in New York. Over the last 15 years, Herman Miller has become really part of my family. You know, I grew up in Turkey, which is like a very interesting culture that's both Eastern and Western, backwards and forwards. And so it's like you're constantly looking at things from two perspectives, usually opposing perspectives. You know, then I came to New York. The sense of like needing to be in New York was very strong for me. I have no idea why, but you know, I had to come to New York. It's so full of cultures, and you know, it's poverty and wealth. You know, culture and unculture at the same time, beauty and ugliness. It's like this whole environment. I was going on vacation in Turkey with Bibi and the kids, which usually are the best times for me to think things through. And so I put aside an hour every day to think and not judge what I was doing. You know, deconstruction is breaking something apart so that you're delinking and breaking the preconceptions. So that you can develop a point of view, and as you shift your point of view, you can see things from a different perspective, which you can then reconstruct as a new value system. Design is imagination, and if you can imagine something, you can make it happen. And if you have a good idea, you can convince other people of that good idea. And so it then becomes, well, if I design my life, maybe I can build more coherence and align myself with my values. And that really is often what happens. It's making them realize their own values. And so if your values are around giving, let's say, and you look at your life and you realize there's not much giving in there, you can say, well, maybe there are certain things I can do to have more of that. Deconstruction, this is deconstruction. You break your preconceptions and you shift your perspective from this to a new place, and then you figure out how to harmonize what you want and what you need, which equals value. Your life is your most important project, so why don't you do it creatively? And as a result, you can have maybe an original life.
I used to be a designer of products, but I'm now a designer of life. Okay? So I love that. I love that sentiment. By the way, just as a comment, we have many of these videos of about that length. Eve Bahar, Don Chadwick, John Franco Zakai, many others. If you Google hermanmiller.com/whydesign, That seems to be a faster way to get there than to search through Miller. So check them out. They're very interesting. This is another great designer, Bill Stump, one of the most influential designers in our history. He did great products for us, such as the world's first ergonomic task chair, the Ergon chair. I think that was in 1971. He followed up that with the Equa chair, and then did the Ethospace office system, and he already saw the Aeron chair that he did with Don Chadwick. Bill had a checklist of things. It's actually 10 things, and he wrote them in a little booklet. I keep this little booklet on my desk, and there's one of his little checklists, each of these 10 things were, he would say, more often than not, if the design exhibits these characteristics, it's probably good work. Okay? One of the ones that has meant the most to me and seems to come up most in conversation at Herman Miller is this: to advance the art of living. Isn't that another beautiful phrase? It's like being a designer of life. He expanded that to say that each new Herman Miller product needs to improve either productivity, comfort, health, or enjoyment. And so now let's think back to DJ, that our work will be judged on its impact to humanity. Let's think about Aisha. I'm a designer of life. Let's think of Bill. Can you advance the art of living? Can you see the theme here? None of these designers are talking about things. They're talking about human experience. Okay? Yes, the human experience is intermediated by the things which exist in our life. You know, our clothing, our furniture, our vehicles, our architecture. But it's very important and telling that from the founding voices of the company to some of the great design voices that we've brought in to the house, so to speak, that they're talking about the creation of human experience. And so what I'd like to do is tell you 5 very short stories that are personal to me, and I hope across the spectrum they go from young to old, and they go hopefully express ways in which you'll see the power of design. The first story I'm going to call An Infant. Look at that baby. I got to tell you, got to interject here. The toy business was great. Like, why are you going back to the toy business? Because only in the toy business could you be working on Mr. Potato Head in the morning and a rectal thermometer in the afternoon. Okay, that's quite a fun range. And so, of course, I decided to tell you about the rectal thermometer. Okay, so mom and dads out there, you raise your hand. A few of you have children. Well, for those of you who don't, you have a special moment awaiting you some point, hopefully. You know that taking an infant's rectal temperature wasn't your favorite moment. Remember, there was a time when there were no forehead swipes and ear probes. You had an analog thermometer. And you have this squiggly, wiggly little infant. And for a parent, you're not a doctor. This amounts to a quasi-medical procedure, right? You have this nervousness about it. And so, I'm at play school, and we realized that we could do something amazingly simple. We had an epiphany. We simply took away the biggest fear. I'll say it. How far? Okay? We introduced the use of clear medical-grade silicone, which was both soft, warm, and clear, so you could know it was cleaned and it was comfortable and so forth. The result was an experience that was far less stressful for mom. The baby is, ambivalent to this. But by removing the stress from the parent, you've probably enabled a more accurate temperature, and that's actually the performance we sought here. And so humbly I'd submit that this is a very small act of human empathy in the manner of a rectal thermometer. It's designing for life, okay? Real life. My second story is about my friend's daughter, Maria. Maria started her life dealing with 2 liver transplants before the age of 6. She's now a teenager and doing very well. But this room was typical of the rooms or environments that she spent a great deal of her young life, and by her parents' estimation, approximately 4 of her 6 years. Imagine that. You notice this is not a room with fairies and My Little Ponies and Winnie the Pooh. This was her room. And it was probably a little bit scary, although I'm always amazed at the resiliency and adaptability of children. At Herman Miller, what we tried to do, we wondered if great design could improve the ambience of the room while still dealing with all the clinical necessities of an acute care environment. Or maybe even not just dealing with the necessities, but maybe even improving care, like that thermometer. So improving the ambience of the room was part of what was our work. This was Compass healthcare system designed by John Franco Zakai with Continuum out of Boston. And the finishes, all the details of this room somehow make it a little less scary, a little less, a little more familiar to what you might see in a residential place, but dealing with what Herman Miller is really great at, which is systemic, thinking. It's got all the same equipment as the room you saw a moment ago with Maria, but it somehow seems quieter, calmer, more relaxing. But the real beauty actually is in the details. I'm going to share a couple of them. They seem like minor things. For example, this design includes a flexible drawer pull, so that a patient won't bruise a thigh. An unsteady patient who's walking in that room bumps into this. That drawer pull is soft and flexible and has a place to go in the receiving area of the drawer front. Also, there's a new technology in the United States. These were completely seamless. There is no edge banding on these fronts, so that you don't want little grungies, getting in that space over time between the laminates and the edge banding. We even designed the shape of the tiles and the drawer fronts to avoid the capillary behavior of liquids, be that bodily liquids or cleaners or anything else. So every little detail, including understanding how water behaves on the surface of this material, was considered to make it as hygienic as possible. I love this story. We even rethought something as simple as a sink. If you look carefully, the faucet of the sink comes back on itself, and as the water exits the faucet, it falls into an asymmetrical sink, which changes the way the water splashes in the sink. We did studies, many studies of hand washing for 10 seconds, 20 seconds, a minute, with pieces of paper. We measured the diameter and distance and quantity of every one of those splashes. That's the kind of detail we went through and created the front curvature and the slope of the sides and all these kinds of things, all because what we're dealing with is a clinical environment. We're trying to make it as healthy as possible. In all, it's a very thoughtful application of design, and we can create a more graceful human experience through the calmness of it, yet perhaps even make a healthier room. How about that? We can do both of these things. My next story is about Jackson. This is Jackson here, being held as a 12-year-old by his father. Jackson is now a young adult. And I've never met Jackson, but I've been told that he's got autism. And it's severe enough that as a young man, he's never yet been able to have a conversation with his father. You can imagine learning environments present a very severe sensory challenge for children like Jackson. Squeaking furniture, screeching chairs, glaring work surfaces, these create an impossibility in a learning environment for someone like Jackson. And frankly, I don't like screeching chairs and glaring work surfaces either. So good design for people with sensory disabilities is good design for all of us. His father here, along with a couple friends in the design profession, have decided to make a difference in the design of the primary education classroom. I've just been providing a little bit of coaching. By focusing on a classroom designed around children with sensory challenges, they're looking at all the senses we know, touch and sight and hearing, but also you may have not heard this word, vestibulatory sense, which is really the sense of movement, rocking and motion and so forth, and then also proprioception, which is really your sense of your body, musculature awareness, and your sense of space, like why I know I don't walk into this column, right? I have a sense of where the edges of my body are. By combining classic ergonomy with vestibulatory thinking and proprioception, they've created a language that they call integrated ergonomy, which is a holistic view of all of these aspects. We're actually intrigued by even the additional layer of what we might call emotional ergonomy, and how all of these layers can build to a redefinition of what the very definition of ergonomy. And it's really laudable work. It's very difficult work, and but it's an example of the kind of work going on where, though the end isn't necessarily in sight, the empathy for human experience is clearly there. My next story is of James. James is my nephew. James is an Army captain and a Black Hawk helicopter pilot. James has done 3 tours of duty, 2 in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq. He is in arguably a very elite class of men who are among the most fit and motivated men in the world. He's unbelievable. What's his story? This perfectly fit young man flies a multi-million-dollar aircraft, and he and pilots like him occasionally fly very long missions. A long mission for a helicopter pilot would be in excess of 8 to 10 hours. Due to poor ergonomics of the cockpit, it's an unbelievable fact that after such a mission, men like him have to literally be carried out of the aircraft, unable to walk. They are unable to deal with bodily functions. They're unable to move. They've got their 2 feet on mobile platforms. They've got a control stick to their rear leftward. They've got one between their legs. They've got a 20-pound helmet with their head cranked up. They can't hit buttons and switches behind their head. It's incredible. I almost defy you to sit in that position for 3 minutes. So the seats are essentially the same technology as was used during Vietnam. And the control interfaces are atrocious. Just as an FYI, the cost of this chair in that aircraft is like $30,000. So I want you to remember that number, because I'm going to reference something a bit later. So believe me, I understand that the performance envelope of a military aircraft is more about survivability than comfort. I get that. The problem with the picture, though, is that you don't see there's a man intended to sit in the chair, right? And I was actually called to Washington, D.C. It was kind of spooky. I went underground to some level, I don't know. But I was speaking with several hundred fully decorated officers from all branches of the military. And I was asked to share Herman Miller, little old Miller, you know, to share our approach to design and help the United States figure this out. What transpired in the conversation was that I learned that their goals were bullets on targets. And it occurred to me later, you know, you're thinking this in real time, you're presenting a design approach by Herman Miller, but the challenge is more than bullets on targets or survivability, actually. It's putting the human in the cockpit at the start of the design process. And you'd think a healthier, more comfortable pilot would perform better. Meanwhile, with far less resources, here's Miller, which is always exploring new technologies and seating. I thought this was a pretty cool shot, because this is an example of the journey Miller goes through. I don't know if you're familiar with the sail chair, but I'll show you a picture in a moment. The images you see here happen to be various generations of prototypes for our recent seating introduction, the sail chair. It was designed by Yves Bahar with the Fuse project out of San Francisco. This is the chair here. And one thing that's pretty remarkable about this, it's beautiful, it's comfortable, it's a great value. These are about $300, okay? And our brief asked Yves Bahar whether he could create, it's kind of funny, we asked him, hey, could you create a chair that would have enough honor that we could actually put the brand on it? Can you create a $300 chair that isn't so cheap that we would lack integrity in putting that red dot on that chair? He actually responded to that brief and in essence implored us not to act on the solution. He said, with all due respect, you're asking the wrong question. The question isn't, can the brand go that low? The question is, can you elevate the art of what's possible for $300? Okay, great reframing and a great lesson for us in that moment. It's the trust that we put in our design partners that we can be spoken to in that way and be clarified and enriched by it. It's a radically different approach to the problem. Can you elevate what's possible for $300? You'd think if the aircraft designer started from, if somebody gave me $30,000 to design a chair, I'd figure that out. So hopefully the military moves slowly, I'm learning, so that story is ongoing, but hopefully there'll be, for the benefit of pilots, there'll be real progress there. So, I'm like the patient room with the thermometer, hopefully in all of these examples there's a performance element. It's human-centered problem solving. It's about performance. You don't get to decide that that's a choice. It's a both and. And this last story is about my grandma. This is my grandmother and my grandpa. As you can see, she was a beautiful woman. She was born in Rome, and she immigrated through Ellis Island, best I can tell, in the early 30s. And this is Anna and Henry. Almost anyone would agree. They happen to be Italian. I told you that. They're from Rome. So food, big deal. And whether you're from Rome or not, we all just came from the holiday weekend. Everyone would agree on the importance of food to a culture and to the social dynamic of family gatherings. It was just so hilarious. My whole childhood growing up, this is like the scene in my mind. Aunts and uncles and siblings and cousins and parents and grandparents, and it was every occasion with my grandmother was a festival of food. I joke, but it's true. As a teenager, I'd go over to my grandmother's house to mow her lawn, and somehow I'd be eating a salami sandwich. I don't know how that occurs, But this is what I remember, and this persisted until very late in her life. I'm telling this story because this isn't the greatest photograph, but I love this photograph. It's just the technology of kind of digitally recreating stuff. I have this photograph because this is what my head sees when I see my grandmother. She was always smiling like this. But Grandma suffered from Alzheimer's. And while she always remained cheerful, like in this picture, the disease caused her to lose her ability to safely cook, taking away one of the great joys of her life. And I've wondered since, did that have to be so? I'm not so sure, and I'll tell you why. Because the stove on the right is the stove that I remember. That's not the stove, but it was like this stove. That was what she cooked on for decades. It's pretty simple. It's got 5 knobs, one for each burner, and high and low, and one for the oven. And they were all where she could reach them. And I should mention she was only like 4'10". Okay. On the right is a stove typical of the one I remember in the house that she moved into to be nearer to my mom and dad, so we could care for her and help her with the house and so forth. There they were, still 4 burner knobs, but they're black on black in the back where she could barely reach them. And this wasn't actually a problem initially. I don't think anyone at the time thought about this, but it was just Grandma getting older. Oops, forgot to turn the stove off, or these kinds of things. But had we had the eyes to see it, we could have done a kindness by either keeping the old stove or getting a stove that was like the old stove that she could understand and operate. And we could have enabled, I'm not sure, but we probably could have enabled my grandmother to continue that joyful behavior, that joyful activity in her life. In some ways, I think that the designer of the stove and we as a family were probably thinking about style, but we weren't thinking about Grandma, And so I just want to check in. So infants and Maria and Jackson, James, my grandmother, can you see that all these stories are related because they reveal the empathy in the designer? Just like us. We have that choice, and we have that responsibility. Now there's a 6th story, that I want to tell you, but I can't, because the story's not yet written. And that story's about you. I want you to really think about whether you'll consider whether a student, a practicing professional, an educator, whether you're willing, as Aisha said, to be a designer of life, or from Bill, to advance the art of living, to allow you to believe that your work is connected to humanity. Please consider setting aside your ego for a moment, perhaps for a lifetime, and seizing the privilege of designing a new world of beautiful experiences through that which you create. I'm sure you will. I hope you will. And I wish you well in it. I sincerely do. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Want to take some questions?
I'd love to. I'd love to.
Thank you so much, Gary.
You're welcome.
Gary's willing to take some questions, so if we have any.
You can ask me about my hardware. No questions? Learn.
Gary, when you went from Hasbro to Herman Miller, was there a job in between, or how hard was that transition? Because sometimes designers can get stereotyped into a particular area of a profession. Mm-hmm. So how did you make that transition?
Yeah. It was interesting. So the answer is yes, there was a intermediary company. You know, with the Harry Potter movies, there's that character, that he who must not be named.
Yeah.
But I won't play that game. I was actually a toy designer at Hasbro. Later, we acquired the Play School brand, so I was working in the infant and preschool products. When I came back to Michigan, I came back because my wife and I started our family, and those family gatherings with my grandparents were so important, such an important part of my life. They were all alive, and I wanted my children to grow up in the context of their great-grandparents and grandparents. So quite literally, with tears in my eyes, I left the toy business. I loved it that much. And by the way, I pray that you will love your job so much that it'll bring you to tears when you walk out because you make a life decision. You'll be blessed if that's the case for yourself. So I left the toy business and I came back to Michigan where the family was, and I was a resident staff with Hayworth. Okay, so I was a furniture designer for the Hayworth Company, also in the Holland, Michigan area for a couple years. As a weird kind of byline, it wasn't so stark for me because in the late 70s I was interning for almost a year at Steelcase. So I'm probably a rare designer who's been employed by Steelcase, Hayworth, and Herman Miller. At least I haven't found anyone else that has had that experience. So I knew because of a year at Steelcase that furniture meant a lot to me. And if you think about it, perhaps other than our homes, maybe the intimacy of our apparel, I mean what we place on our very bodies, but furniture is maybe the next most intimate thing. The intimacy of the interface with our bodies, we sleep on it, we sit on it, we dine at it, we're with our friends. Right? Furniture is so intrinsically connected to our human experience that resonated with me. And so in some ways, the empathy for a child, like I dare you to design for an infant and be, to lack empathy. It's impossible. And so when you start with the perfect job, which was in the toy business and realizing the deep joy and responsibility of designing for children, when I moved to the furniture business, I just made a choice. I simply said, if I can't bring that level of integrity to the work, I'll have the honor to walk out the door. What, to my great delight, I found was that 25 years at Herman Miller and those couple years also at Hayworth that were after my toy career, that I've found a deep joy in knowing that there's tens of thousands of people who will suffer good or ill based on the work that I do with our design partners. That's quite a privilege. and it's never been lost on me. So though the clock speed was radically different, I mean, I could sketch a dinosaur or a pony, and 4 months later it's on a blister card selling for $4.99. You get into the furniture business, it was kind of like, hey, in January we ought to set up a meeting sometime before the end. So the clock speed was a little hard to get used to, and now I'm on the suffering the other side of that. Now, as a vice president of exploration, we can't possibly do things quickly enough. So we're always pressured to be more efficient, more thoughtful, more discerning. So there were amazing continuities, because design, whatever you decide to go into, whether it's consumer designs or furniture, fashion, you're serving. I meant what I said about the ego. This is not about you. It's really not. If it's about you, go do your art, right? I'm a fine arts major. I can appreciate the comment. I do art, and when I paint, I don't care if my mom likes the painting. When I'm designing, it's not about me, nor you. You are in a service model, okay? The service you're providing may be joy, beauty, performance, comfort, health. I had such a great, is Wendell in here? Oh, I had such a great joy to be hosted by Wendell Castle this morning in the studio. Wendell's bringing his gifts to the world in a way that are completely unique from my gifts and completely legitimate. Right? There's room for it. But don't be disingenuous to the privilege. Respect it. And so, toy design, furniture design, there's this grand continuity that's beautiful. And it's bigger than the subject matter to which you apply your talents. At least that's one man's point of view. So, sure.
The military project to redesign the chair, is that something coming from you or from them as a request? And usually when you do a redesign, does it usually come internally from the organization or primarily from clients?
Yeah. So 2 questions, I'll answer them briefly. One of the gentlemen we work with was a former Olympic downhill skier who broke his back. This sounds like a weird roundabout way to answering the question, but I'm talkative, okay? His name's Dr. Brock Walker. So he broke his back, and to solve his own problems, he became an expert, became a chiropractor and a doctor, and so he does some amazing research that informs the ergonomy of our present day seating. Dr. Brock knows everybody. He raced with Franz Klammer in the '72 Olympics. He knows Bodie Miller. He knows everybody, and he actually designed the seat for Gordon Johncock when Gordon Johncock won the Indy 500 a month after being completely disabled in a horrific accident. And if you listen to the replay, Google this, the replay of the finish of that race, the announcer saying, and here's Gordon Johncock winning the race in that crazy seat of his. That crazy seat was designed by Brock Walker. Brock Walker ended up making a connection with an admiral in the US Navy who said, man, you need to talk to these fine folks over here at Herman Miller. That's how I had the privilege of going to Washington and talking to them about how a little company like Miller, by comparison to the US government, can do some amazing things like the Aeron chair and the Setu chair and the Mira chair and the Sail chair. Right? So that's how that connection occurred. That came by invitation. We were asked to speak to them. And I'm sorry, but this is a bit of a digression. When I was in the toy business, we launched G.I. Joe, and one of my friends was a sculptor. He sculpted my face, so my face is actually on like 10 million G.I. Joes out there. So the reason this is relevant, I know it's kind of weird, see yourself as a 5-inch doll, but so I'm introduced to the U.S. military in this amphitheater with all these people in uniform as G.I. Joe. Like, you can imagine I was mortified. It's a little less disarming here because you're not in uniform. But most of our design assignments come from research that Miller has done where we come to a point of view about, you might say, our irrelevancy. We say, man, we should be dealing with this, and we're not. And so all of the work with Josh and Eve and Aisha, those kinds of folks, I spend literally years getting to know them, so I know it's like finding the pearl within. I'm trying to understand so intimately, might I defer my spirit? Remember I made that quote? A deferential spirit to design provocation. Like, think about any relationship. Can you defer your spirit to one you don't trust? So you must establish the trust and the willingness, attitudinally, to defer one's spirit to the provocation coming from design. That can only be done in a relationship that's more than transactional. DJ would have called it covenantal. And so we seek intimate relationships with those whom we can trust implicitly. And then we share our worries, our fears, our business with them, and then seek to do something important together. Now here's what interesting happens though, the real piece of the question. For those whom we have that kind of a relationship with, we find ourselves able to hear their voice in a way that's different from what I'll call unsolicited submissions. I get perhaps 500 unsolicited submissions a year. I'll go back to my office tomorrow late, and there'll be 12 from this week. And most of them are, hey, you should make my coffee table. Hey, you should make my light. I don't care about the coffee table or the light. You know what I care about? I care about the person who created the thinking that created the coffee table or the light. When I tell them, I'm not interested in your thing, I'm interested in you who created the thing. So I'm not shopping for ideas. What I'm looking for is gray matter. I'm looking for intellect. I'm looking for empathy and thoughtfulness and provocation. That's what I'm hiring. Okay? So yes, they're normally outbound design briefs to those whom we trust. Occasionally, I'll get something that is so remarkable to me from someone I don't know that it causes me to pick up that phone or even get on a plane and get to know this remarkable person who put that on my desk. And then the story begins. Okay? There was a question over here.
You mentioned painting. I'm curious what other kinds of hobbies or activities you do outside of your work.
Oh, boy. I love to get... it's kind of weird. Have any of you ever heard of adventure racing? Do you know what adventure racing is? It's kind of cool. It's races that are 12, 20, 30, 40 hours long, and it includes generally kayaking or paddling, mountain biking, and deep woods orienteering. And it involves nutrition, psychology, technical aptitude, strategy. You know, you can decide at 2 in the morning after racing for 15 hours whether to hold your bike over your head and ford the swamp, or ride the bike 3 miles down to the bridge and come back if you don't want to get wet because it's 50 degrees out. That's a strategic choice. Fantastic. So Google adventure racing. Don't do it if you don't like leeches and mud, okay? So that's what I like to do. A little bit less on the extreme side is just snowshoeing, mountain biking. My wife and I are very active. We do a lot of kayaking. And we live here's my Michigan map. I live right here on the west coast of Michigan. So, you know, half a mile away is the shore. And so we spend a lot of time on the water. So that's kind of what I like to do. So, way back in there, I'll get you, Alex.
You talk about the relationship you set up with professional designers that you work with. How does that translate when you're looking to hire a young designer? And then during the interview process, you know, this is somebody that I want to work with.
Yeah. I know when the designer decides to tell me the truth. I'll tell you a little story. I once was talking to a designer, and you know, you're hearing me now for an hour or whatever, and I was talking about this deferential spirit to provocation, and there's responsibility and human empathy, and I'm trying to understand, like, boy, we're missing each other. I'm thinking this, I'm not saying it. I'm like, man, I still haven't cracked that nut. And finally he says, this is a true story, he says, Mike, I'm mid-sentence, I'm saying something, are you, and he goes, time out. He says, I'm just looking for billable hours. That's what he said. I don't know what we're talking about. I'm just looking for billable hours. You got any? I'm like, bingo. We're not communicating. And I said to him, you know what I said to him? That's what I thought, but here's what I said. Thank you. Thank you for telling me the truth. I don't have anything I need right now for a transactional couple of hours that you seek. But when I do, and sometimes I do, I know who to call. Okay? Now here's the real introspection. You know, you can imagine it's easy to get judgmental, like, how dare this guy walks in just like, I don't even know him. You got some work for me? Like, who are you? Right? The real issue wasn't him at all. The real issue was when I thought about that night, is I finally did my job. What is that? I put that designer in a position to tell me his truth. In this case, it was a he. Right? I could do no better. It took me 45 minutes for me to finally do my job. Right? And so, for each one of you, if you ever find yourself in a position to be working with Herman Miller, I know they're hireable when they will stand convicted and truthfully express themselves. Absent that, they're a pair of hands. I can buy beauty all day long. There's guys who can style it up. I don't care about that. So that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for any clue, young or old, that this person is prepared to stand in front of a multi-billion-dollar organization and speak the truth. Their truth. Why? Because we have a deferential spirit to the provocation. That's why. It all kind of knits together. Okay? By the way, I should probably, full disclosure, we fail at this all the time. Right? You'd think I was lying. We do. We have these fantastic aspirations and this poetry of history and this narrative, advance the art of living, and it's wonderful. It's inspiring. That doesn't mean we succeed at that all the time. That would be a lie. But it's great to have an aspiration to which you can aspire. Right? Alex, you had a question?
Yeah. So as more and more designers are, entering executive positions in the boardroom, and you as a designer yourself, how do you define design leadership, and how do you think that's different from leadership in general?
The general answer is it's not different. I think leadership is a service model. I think where I see things go awry is when any leader, a design leader or a business leader, forgets that those who are led are inspired to follow. That many kind of ills of the world are through kind of directive and control and power. So if you can imagine a gentle, I do try to lead in a gentle way. I'm going to allow you, don't patronize me. I don't have forever. If we're going to have a design conversation, I'm not going to give you the second try, the third try, the fourth try to find out what pushes my buttons until I smile or something. I'm looking for your truth, whether I get it or not. And so from a leadership point of view, I think that the best thing I could do is put the designer in a position to reveal that truth, reveal their intellect, reveal their vision. And then we can make a real quality business decision. We need this or we don't, right? And everyone can stand there on that ground and say, hey, it's not personal. We're a public company. We have a business to run. So I think maybe it's different for other companies, but through Herman Miller's history, DJ was a very quiet man. And if you can imagine this very pillar of the Christian Reformed community in Zeeland, Michigan, a very conservative area of the company, and he hires this cigar-smoking wrangler from New York, George Nelson. Right? Like, how on earth did those two guys exist in the same room? Right? Do you think, how long would have George Nelson lasted if there was a bombastic DJ giving him directives on what it meant to lead design? DJ quietly allowed himself to be guided by George's leadership and was willing to defer that spirit, as I said. So that's kind of how I think about leadership in general. People want leadership. It's not a dirty word. It's only a dirty word when it becomes an abuse of power. So that's how I think about that. Any other thoughts or conversations? If you look, I know if you're not one to want to stand up in 100 people, again, we'll have time, catch me conversationally over a mouthful of pizza. That'd be great too. But I'll just, any last questions? If not, there's one back here, so, yeah.
Have you ever had a design problem where you felt like you weren't completed, or you had to finish it, but you were forced to move on to another project?
That's a challenge that we face on every project. It really is. It's no different than, this the cadence of the midterm and the final, and you find yourself asking, is it good enough, right? There is a test. I talk to students in elementary settings and high school settings, so sometimes when I get really simple, and I don't mean to patronize this audience, more mature, but I'll just give an example of a cup. So here's a cup. And this hopefully will answer the question. Paper cup, glass cup, ceramic cup, hollowed out rock. Does any of that matter? What matters? If this cup leaks, is it a cup? It's no cup. A leaky cup is the same thing as a boat that doesn't fly, or a boat that doesn't float, or a plane that doesn't fly. Yeah, okay. That would be interesting. A leaky cup lacks integrity. So, another way of saying, in a more sophisticated way, the Aeron chair. I told you, we build one of those every 17 seconds to someone who's already bought one. Okay? We don't put any in inventory. There's a story, it's a true story, I've seen it, where when that chair was introduced in 1994, I don't know if it came from marketing or where it came from, but someone said, oh man, this chair is great. If we had an executive version of the Aeron chair, a leather padded, we could sell 1 million of them. So we built one. We built 2 of them actually. They're in our archives. Leather padded Aeron chair. And because of the brand, the cachet of that brand, the Aeron franchise, if we made leather padded Aeron chairs and marketed it to senior executives for hierarchical reasons, their own vanity, we're a public company. We could probably sell tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars of Aeron chairs. But guess what? What we found out was a leather Aeron chair is hot. We've never sold one. That's one of the reasons why I'm still at Miller, because it's a company that has the integrity to not sell a leaky cup. So if it's good enough, what you have to know is, at the very center of the design is that thing which is so central, what I call the core conceptual premise. The core premise, the transport of a small bit of liquid from here to there. This is not a wash basin, this is not a bucket, it's not a bathtub. This has to be scaled to the size of a hand that can reach around it. It has to be scaled to the strength of a human arm. These are all in the calculation. If I can't lift it, if I can't grasp it, if it leaks, all of those are demarcations of a design that lacks legitimacy and ought not be done. So, it could always be better. We could take that last bit, that additional molecule out of the equation. What you need to decide as a designer as you look at your own work is, does it have integrity to its very reason for existence? And there's no doubt that it'll never be, within that envelope, you'll probably never perfect it because of constraint. Time constraint, investment constraint, all other kinds of constraints. Those are real. Don't try to be agnostic to that. Just deal with it. But have the integrity to call something as lacking truth if that's in fact the case. That's kind of how I think about it. I was saying, when someone asked me a question about a chair, it doesn't matter whose chair it was, and they asked me, this has actually happened to me a couple times. I was asked this about a Geary building as well, but in this case I'll tell you the story of a chair. Do you think that chair is beautiful? I said, why? I don't know. I haven't sat in it. You see, a beautiful chair that's uncomfortable to sit in is pretty damn ugly, from my point of view. So the first purpose of a chair is to support the human body, not to exist as a form, from my point of view. So those can be coalesced. You can be beautiful and comfortable. So I hope those are ways of expressing the challenge on every project. Like, do you know when it's done? And it's almost never done. And even like Studio 75, who did the Mira chair, and then 10 years later did the Set 2 chair, they had come to be much more acutely aware of each and every molecule that was part of the experience they were creating. Was there a question over here?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
When you're talking about ergonomics, I was wondering, have you ever struggled with people who wanted to sacrifice ergonomics for the sake of aesthetics? And if so, how did you deal with that in a way that was not contentious and help resolve to a solution?
Sacrificing, could you hear the question? We were asked about whether we've ever been confronted by sacrificing ergonomics for the sake of aesthetics.
Or people who wanted to do that, like someone saying marketing or...
Yeah. The answer is everything is messy. There's always a set of kind of countervailing arguments to almost every argument. And so if you have this kind of Pollyanna version of what design is, like you sketch it and then you mock it up and then you build it in full scale and then someone makes it, that's not what happens. It is in a macro sense. But what actually happens is at each stage it's vetted by more and more voices who want, and this isn't designed by committee, by the way, but they're real voices, people who from their point of view are speaking to the relevancy from their point of expertise. And so there is, when you think of the population for whom the design is intended, like the radical range of human bodies and physical states in a healthcare environment is radically different than the kind of human body that exists in a corporate B&B, business-to-business environment. I was telling Josh, we were talking about this the other day because we were talking about healthcare. You may not have an eye or an arm or a leg, but you're going to be healthy. That's irrelevant. If you're in an office environment, you're probably healthy enough to be there, regardless of what the presence of a finger, right? In healthcare, it's completely different. I don't expect 3-month-old children and 90-year-old people in my business environment, right? So if you think of human population, the business environment is like a sliver of a human population, and therefore what one might need to consider relative to what's appropriate ergonomically has to deal with the 400 or 600-pound man as well as the 70-pound adolescent. So sometimes there's just no way within that envelope to optimize ergonomy for all. So you're knowingly, I wouldn't call it a sub-optimization, I would really call it as being kind of truthfully addressing the constraint, in this case the range of human population to be accommodated. So to the extent that we can and what we can afford, I mean there's millions of dollars of capital and tooling and all this kind of stuff, we always try to do our best. But we also, as a public company, there's people who have, put in good faith, put their money in Herman Miller stock, and hoping to, pay for a child's education or their retirement. So we have to be really respectful of the stewardship of that money and make sure that while something might be perfected, the actual service in this empathy conversation I've been telling you about, that the gains become so minuscule that they don't warrant the negative sides of the delay or the capitalization. So it's always messy. But you try to find where the correct crossover is. So, I just want to be conscious of time. I'll get your question, but don't be, if you got to run, please don't feel compelled to stay. But if this is interesting, I'm happy to.
One last question, and then I want to invite everybody to come and have pizza. We've got pizza for 300, so come up to the ID studios on the 4th floor. Gary's here to mingle with you. Let's take one last question, and then you can...
Yes, please.
So you keep touching back on honesty.
Yeah.
You keep touching back on the importance of honesty and truthfulness. How did that value become so important to you?
How did honesty and truthfulness become so important to me? This is going to be a weird way to answer the question. My dad was a musician, and one of the things, and so from a young child, like 7 years old, something like that, I started playing an instrument. And what I really love to do is play improvisationally, basically jazz. And there's like a channeling when you're playing improvisationally, you're so in the moment, so committed that there isn't judgment. You don't have time for the judgment. And what I found was, remember I talked about that the children, what I learned from the children is they're so channeled in that way. There's such a lack of filtration between what they perceive their experience to be and how they express that emotionally. I was just, it happened to be my first job. I mean, how lucky is that? I was just stunned by how clear that was. I didn't have a child at that time. I was only, 21. But it was so obvious. I remember one little kid, it was a toddler, so this was speaking by this time, and I designed some toy, and he said something like, I'll paraphrase, "This toy's yucky." Well, thank you for that, Johnny. I mean, it was to him, and we didn't do it. I just think the life I've lived, the parenting I've had, the experiences I've had, it just seems like if we can, as we relate to each other, and as we create experiences for each other, that if we can remove the posturing and if we can remove the ego and deal at a very human level, that seems to me, like what humanity needs. And it makes it real clear, it makes it really easy to make decisions. You don't have to, you don't have to debate too much. The cup leaks. Truthfulness or lack of truthfulness to what a cup should be. A pencil cup, I don't care if it leaks. But a water cup, I do. So I don't really know. It's a very interesting question. The question will cause me to ponder that on my flight home. So thanks for that homework. Well, let's join you upstairs and enjoy some pizza. You're welcome.